From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again. Welcome to the show. It would certainly be wrong not to start today off with a note of congratulations to the Wirtz Corporation, a Chicago-based diversified commercial and residential real estate corporation with interests in wine distribution, insurance, banking, and National League hockey, for the great success of one of their businesses, a success that will no doubt score them some increased political influence with the city and the state and allow them to increase the cost to the public for ticket prices and ultimately fatten their bottom line significantly. Go Hawks. And while we're on the subject of swollen civic pride, I don't want to get all political on you folks, but could you just indulge a quick piece of hypothetical speculation? What if 100 or so African-American young people, probably quite drunk, assembled, say, at Clark and Fullerton, and moved systematically along the street, smashing more than 50 store windows and throwing stuff at mounted police and their horses? Think that would have made the front pages of our major newspapers? Think WLS radio would have been talking about it much? Well, for the most part, this pretty ugly little piece of fan violence after the hockey game was reported as rowdiness, but not mob action, not wilding. I'll leave you to answer the question, because my job is just to ask them. All right, on today's show, major SCOTUS decisions on gay rights, a new school board member, serious budget cuts at nearly every Chicago public school, and a bunch of guys who want to replace Pat Quinn. Oh, there's so much to get to in 28 minutes, and a couple of great people to help us with that. Lauren Fitzpatrick, education writer for the Chicago Sun-Times.
Okay.
Glad to have you on the show
Thank
today.
you.
Greg Hinz joining us from Crain Chicago Business. Just terrific to have you on the show, Greg. Thank you so much. So let's begin where I think we really have to begin, with the Supreme Court of the United States. Their decision was far-reaching, probably historic, but does it mean anything if you are a gay couple in Illinois? Does it affect your life in any way?
Not yet, but potentially. What the court did is insist that federalism has to rule in this area. If a state chooses to define marriage to include same-sex couples, well, guess what? The feds can't unilaterally come in and say, oh, we don't consider you gays, and you still have to file separate taxes and Social Security and everything else. So in doing so, they kind of highlighted and broad brush strokes what's at stake for the gay community in Illinois, but they didn't take, I think wisely, they didn't take the step of saying, and therefore we're going to legalize same-sex marriages everywhere. They said if the state wants to do it, this is the carrot at the end of the journey. But in Illinois, we haven't done it quite yet. We're in the middle of a big fight. But this will probably, a long way of answering a question, this will probably help that cause a little bit, because it ought to pump up the advocates a little bit.
I mean, as a political observer who's been around for a while, you've seen this and you've actually watched this very battle going on in the Illinois House. I can't figure out, does it give the people who have opposed same-sex marriage in the House, does it give them incentive to move one way or the other, or does it just firm them up? I mean, you could make an argument both ways, that now all of a sudden you have a class of people in the United States who 24 hours ago, none of them had this right. Now suddenly people in 13 states have about 1,000 rights that the others don't have. So as a legislator, if you vote no, you're kind of voting against giving these rights that the feds say you should have. But on the other hand, there's also more sort of political and cultural pressure to fight this tide.
You're right. That is particularly true in the African American community, where the Black Caucus in Springfield has emerged as a real pivot on this one. They're inclined, in terms of national political politics, to go one way, but culturally, because of the influence of the church and the black community, they're inclined to go the other way. I'll answer the way Greg Harris answered that question, though, the chief sponsor. I asked him that question. He said, hey, for people who are on the fence, who haven't quite figured out what to do, this is a big, bright signal of the way history is going.
The arc of history curves toward justice, or boy, did I mangle that quote, but something along.
Cards in favor of a vote to legalize.
Yes, there you go. All right. Well, there are a number of other things that I want to talk about that are really hot in the news right now, but we have Lauren with us today, which gives us an opportunity to really talk in some depth about some of the things that we just hammer at every week here on this program, talking about schools and the schools' closings and the budgets. And I have to begin with an observation that maybe both of you would like to weigh in on. We and a number of other people in the news media have, I think, been guilty of focusing incessantly on the closing of schools. How many will it be? Will it be 150? Will it be 50? Will it be 38? And then, to no one's surprise, it's exactly the number they said it would be. And then that battle sort of begins to wane, and then you realize that no, the real story all along was the budget. The real story was these school-based budgets that suddenly Wendy Catton and the people at Raise Your Hand and others have started cataloging this, and you're seeing it clicking up to $150 million in classroom cuts, teacher cuts, that kind of thing. And you step back and you say, wow, this really was the story all along. We are going to see a drastically reduced, regardless of the 50 that have already closed, a drastically reduced education budget. Am I wrong?
Except that for the 50 school communities that are going away, and 48 of them, are gone as of this past Monday, it was the real story for them as to, will we exist, will we not exist? Are our kids going to be shipped across town? What are they going to have to walk through? Will the new school be better? Will the teachers know the children? That was the real story for them. I honestly believe that.
I want to amend my remarks because yes, that's absolutely right. And I didn't mean to in any way infer that this was not a story. It's just that while we were spending so much time looking at that,
yes,
these school-based budgets were being developed, and then it just suddenly felt like it got dropped on us, and you're going, duh.
And they came out very quietly. The district started talking about, we're going to move to this student-based budget modeling, I want to say in March, which was right around the time that the list of 54, the final, this is what the CEO is going to recommend, was coming out as well. And then that was sort of the end of it until the news dropped that principals started getting these draft budgets where it's now based strictly on the number of children you have in your school, and it's like a certain number of dollars per child instead of you're guaranteed a principal, you're guaranteed a clerk, you're guaranteed so many classroom teachers, and then if your school is larger, you get maybe some more positions.
Yeah, I think the commonality here, you're both right, is that Rom's the mayor's schools team once again is having...
No, be Mr. Emanuel. You work for Crain's.
Mr. Emanuel. Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Your Highness. His school team once again is stumbling and bumbling, and in my opinion, not being completely honest here. Yes, they have a big budget deficit. Is it the $1 billion they're talking about? Probably not. They've got some stuff in mind that's going to cut it down to it's still going to be a big number, but nowhere near as big of a number as $1 billion. But instead of, and Lauren is right, instead of releasing all this stuff in public and putting it together in one document saying, folks, we have a real problem, we don't have any choice, Springfield didn't give us help with pensions, therefore we're going to have to cut $400 million out of the local schools, and here it is, and golly gee, it's a problem, and help us out, put some pressure on Springfield. Instead, they kind of tried to sneak it through while the mayor continues to proclaim, well, all that longer school day and all those extra classes I added, I'm still going to add it.
We're not going to touch the classrooms, or at least...
They can't do it all. There isn't enough money. And instead of just fessing that up out front, they're kind of doing this the City Hall way.
Well, the school board, sort of acknowledged that yesterday, finally, that we said we're going to try to minimize cuts to the classroom, but we never said we weren't going to touch the classroom. And David Vitale himself said we'd all be naive to think none of this would touch the classroom. But it's taken the reporting of LSCs and parents and principals kind of brave enough to leak what their budgets were.
Right. So we have budgeting by or public awareness of the budget by leaking. And activism, people who are calling up their friends at the LSCs and getting them.
It's even worse than that. When reporters have asked, I assume you have asked the media folks for Chicago Public Schools, how much does all this amount to? How many positions are going to have to go? They come back with the answer, well, it's not final, so we can't say, even though each LSC has been given a budget and asked to vote on it.
Of all the things that are so annoying, nothing's more annoying than this hiding behind it's not final until it's final. And then when it's final, well, we can't do anything about it because it's final.
Right.
I mean,
it's the oldest City Hall dodge in the world.
We've been around too long, Greg. We've both seen this happen, but never, I think, to the degree that we're seeing it happening right now with CPS. It's just, it's incredible.
And meanwhile, all these real-world decisions about teachers and programs and writing centers and Whitney Young kids having to pay maybe $500 to take an extra class, all those plans are being put in place now because the principals have to, because it's already the end of June. And
all this stuff is really debilitating at a local level. It's kind of, in some ways, the school closings on steroids because it affects everybody. For every academic study that I'm aware of suggests that for the schools to really work and do their job and teach, you need to have the parents actively involved.
They're getting involved now.
The parents have to lean on the kid and do the kind of things that a good parent does to make sure the resources are there. But instead, they're just irritating people because they're not being fed. They're being fed half-truths.
I can't get over this sense I have that this is just a really cynical and sneaky way of doing it. I mean, on paper, it looks like a really progressive thing to do, to say we're going to move the budgeting down, we're going to push it down to the school level, let the principals make these decisions. But the way it's coming out to me is it's just a way of hiding under the desk and letting the principals take the heat.
Well,
and pushing the heat out into
Ben Jurafsky at the Reader, who I don't agree with on everything, particularly on TIF policy, put it kind of similar to that. He said, hey, this way the mayor gets the credit for the longer day and the local school principals have to do the dirty work to try to get the mayor what he wants.
Right.
Except that the principals are saying we can't give the mayor what he wants because we've lost $4 million at Kelly High School, for example. So do you think the math teacher is going to go before the music teacher? Probably not. It's the longer day positions, the fuller day positions that are going.
Greg, you've written some fairly provocative stuff about this, and one of the things that I think that I think it's so critical not to lose focus on is this quote-unquote billion-dollar deficit. Again, the benefit or the burden of having been around for a long time is that I've seen 20 or 25 of these school budgets, and I don't think there's ever been a year when there hasn't been a budget deficit of somewhere in the couple of $100 million range until the day before it gets passed, and then suddenly they find money from somewhere. And one of my favorites, of course, is, and I've said this over and over again, is the finding the money in the central office. If we could just, if you're a student at Columbia right now and you want to get your first Pulitzer, here's the way you do this. You go back to 1979 and you count the number of people who have been fired from the central office since 1979. It's going to be in the thousands. It's going to be in the billions of dollars. Every year it happens. And then the next year, they're able to find another $100 million. But we never see the press release when they've hired those people back. So I don't understand it, Greg. Explain it.
Well, I think you probably did a pretty good job of explaining it. 10 of the last 7 school board heads have claimed, have gotten up at the beginning of the year and said, we've cut to the bone. We've gotten rid of all those bureaucrats.
There is no fat left.
And lo and behold, they find another $50 or $60 million the next year. I mean, clearly people, maybe they do cut them, but then they get rehired one way or another. I'm not close enough to it to tell you. It's a con. There's another little con going on here too, and it's a combination of good news and bad news. The good news is that the property tax bills that used to go out in like November and December, even though we're supposed to go out August 1st, or July 1st actually, now we're getting out on time. There's been some changes at the county building. I have to give some credit to Joe Barrios, the county assessor, for having done that. But what it means is CPS can count on $200, $300 million in money earlier than they used to. They're going to do that in this budget. So that $1 billion figure subtract $200 or $300 million.
How does that make? I don't understand, but I'm just a TV
it's cash
talk show
flows. It's like you're getting your paycheck a month early.
But you're not getting any more money. You're just getting it earlier. So
you get to
credit it on this year's budget. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Oh, that's what it is. Oh, that's great. So, but of course, then next year we're going to.
And
have
then there's some state money that's coming in a little bit early too. But with the assumption that the system is fixed, the property taxes are always going to get it on time, you don't have a problem. If, however, we go back to the old system, then you're right. We're instead of having 13 months some year, we're going to have 11 months of payments.
Right. Well, then there's also the thing about the pension payments and the legislative pension relief that we've been under for the last 3 years. Our old buddy Wet Moser at Chicago Magazine did this very nice graphic, which I'm sure you've both seen. But essentially, if you look at the liability, pension liability, since this is only since 2005, look at how it starts here and it ends up here. And partly it's because for the last 3 years, we haven't been paying hardly any of it because we've had a pension holiday. Now, as I understand, and I don't understand this actually, but I read, both of you have written about this, that this is one of the things that was pending in the legislature, and I didn't even understand that, was to give them another pension holiday. Is that right? That they would have had like even another many tens of millions of dollars they wouldn't have to pay this year?
A partial holiday. When Ron Huberman was the superintendent several years ago, he had a big budget problem, and the way he decided to solve the budget problem, I'm sure Ron would say this is the only choice he had, was to cut for several years the amount of money that CPS had to put into its pension fund. The teachers went along with it. They didn't squawk because they were getting big raises. They were getting at the front end and saying, well, we'll worry about retirement some other time. Well, that pension holiday is due to expire next year, in the school year that's just about to start. So the city is required to put in, the Board of Education is required to put in a bunch more money than it had been. It's some hundreds of millions of dollars. They don't have it.
Right.
So one of the bills that was floated in Springfield after the legislature failed to deal with mega pension relief for everybody, and was one that would allow CPS to partially defer some of the increased increment they were supposed to put in the next couple of years.
That's beautifully stated.
It didn't pass.
Yeah, okay.
So now they're still stuck with the problem, and unless Springfield in the later this summer deals with it and gives them some relief, they're going to have to make these kind of cuts. We're now talking about the local level.
But you've reported, though, Lauren, that Rahm Emanuel has used the T word. He said that maybe he's going to have to raise or allow the Board of Education to raise taxes even beyond the ceiling or something.
And I have to be perfectly honest, that was my colleague Fran Spielman,
okay,
who was grilling the mayor on, are you going to raise the taxes or are you not going to raise the taxes? As Fran is the champion of.
Yes, we all love Fran. Yeah.
Yes, and last I remember, I don't think he would commit either way.
Okay, all right. But, I mean, that certainly has to be something on the table at this point.
It's on the table. I'm told that they're probably not going to do that, despite Fran's best efforts to get the mayor to admit it. They are going to levy to the cap the 3% roughly increase that they can do. That's going to happen for sure, so that's going to be another 50, 60, 70 million, whatever the figure is. But anything beyond that is really politically risky, particularly for some guy who would be heading into the beginning stretch of his re-election
campaign. Yeah, because
as
Rich Daley taught us, you raise taxes like crazy in the second year of your 4 years, not the third or the fourth. That's just not done.
So meanwhile, the kids will buy their own toilet paper.
Yeah.
Is how it's shaking out.
Yeah. So, okay, I can't get off of this. This $1 billion deficit is not really a $1 billion deficit, right? Or is it, or what? I mean, and obviously nobody really knows.
Well, after it would appear, and I say appear because they haven't really been candid or answer a lot of questions. It would appear that after you assume the early payment of the property tax and what's coming from the state, and the increase in the real estate tax, that $1 billion, and then you want to throw in on top of that maybe the central office cuts, you're certainly south of $500 million. How far south, I don't know.
But still, that's 500, as they used to say, 500 million is real money. So I mean, that's still got to come out of the classroom. That's still got to come out of firing teachers, right?
Well, one would think.
One would think. Now, of course, we've already laid off 850 school personnel, mostly teachers.
Mostly
I understand,
teachers.
right?
Mostly.
But then you reported yesterday that the Safe Passage program is talking about hiring 600 people to help kids get from the closed schools to the so-called welcoming schools.
Yes.
We're laying off 850 teachers, but we're hiring 600 people to stand outside and make sure the kids don't get hurt on the way to the new schools.
Sure, but I mean, a teacher's salary with benefits and everything else compared with
Okay.
$9, $10 an hour for a safe passage worker.
But there's still something really kind of ugly about that, isn't there? That we can't find money for teachers, but we can find money for people to help kids not get attacked by gangs.
Right. And a bunch of the folks who were laid off too. I mean, it was school staffers. So a whole lot of bus aides lost their jobs too, who, sat on buses and helped kids stay safe and broke up fights and that kind of thing. They're going to be adding buses when they move kids to these
There's
new
going to be
schools.
more busing.
So are they going to rehire the bus aides? I don't know. I haven't gotten a straight answer on that yet.
I don't think anybody's thought any of this stuff through.
I worry they haven't thought any of this through.
And I mean, it's not really for us to speculate, but certainly plenty of people have said, and you guys have reported, that there are people who know about this stuff who say that when you take certain school A and mix it in with school B, you're more than merging the staffs and the physical plant. You're merging, in some cases, 2 or many more than 2 gang cultures within that school. It's one thing to talk about the violence that might happen outside the school, but what happens inside the school, and woe be unto the principal who's got to deal with that.
Ken, I agree with you. That's a legitimate concern, but I don't think that necessarily means you don't close schools. I mean, the facts are there are fewer kids in the system, a lot fewer kids than there used to be. A rational system will slowly, insensibly ratchet down the number of schools to reflect the decrease in the student population.
Slowly and sensibly,
Granted. Now, the real question here, though, is that when you get rid of schools and move into new schools, in effect, as you guys have reported very well, the real money is being saved by having more kids in each classroom, up to a point that makes sense. If you're going from a classroom of 10 kids or 12 kids to 20 kids, that makes sense. If you're going to a classroom with 40 kids, so it depends on the details.
And then the other problem with this whole argument is that while 48 schools are now gone, how many new charters are going to open in the fall? So, and those complaints
and what
came
role
out.
did the charters play in the decimation of those other schools in the first place?
So then if we don't have as many children and we don't need as many schools, we don't need as many classrooms, there are a number of parents who, as recently as yesterday at the board meeting, were asking, why are you opening these new charter schools? We don't need them. Why are you opening them?
Yeah, but I got to play devil's advocate on that one. If parents want to move their kid to a charter school rather than a local public school, why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they have that choice?
Well, there are plenty of people who give you answers to that. I don't think we have time to really spend a lot more time on that. But that is, that's a very important and very critical social political issue that I don't think has been really debated very well in our society in the United States.
Granted.
And when you have a mayor who is very much aligned with the commercial education system and has appointed a school board filled with people who are of that proclivity, then the debate really doesn't happen, does it? And what you have is increasing numbers of charters, and you see, I thought it was fascinating the other day to see that Barack Obama's own Department of Education, after doing a 2-year study, came out with yet another study saying that charters have not proven themselves to be any more effective than public schools. So, that would be an interesting debate to have.
On the other hand, there was a Stanford University study earlier in the week that suggested, well, there's been some minor improvements. It depends on the state.
Yeah, and it also depends on where the charters are. There does seem to be some improvement when charter schools are put into really impoverished neighborhoods, which would stand to reason because those are probably the worst schools. And so if you can make some money improving those schools, then there are people who are willing to invest in making money to improve those schools.
And I'd just like to add really quickly that in Chicago, with the exception of UNO, the charters aren't going into the neighborhoods that need more schools, where they're so overcrowded, and you could argue we need more seats. They're going into, there's a new one, at least one, and I think 2 new ones opening in Roseland. And how many traditional public schools were just closed there too?
Yeah, So it's not fair to say that there's no relationship between the opening of charters and the closing of traditional public schools. They are hand in glove in so many ways. Could we move on, because we have only a couple of minutes? I would just love to hear what you guys have to say about the very early start to the governor's race. Pat Quinn's got himself all kinds of competition now. Brady's in the race, Daley's in the race, and of course Bruce Rauner is in there with lots of money. And then there's this guy Quinn. I understand he's running too. And then there's some woman who I think is associated with somebody in the legislature, but I don't know. I don't know her name. What do you think? All right, let's put the question specifically. I will put on the table that I think that Pat Quinn is being underestimated, and that he might be a more formidable candidate than anybody thinks.
He is, but there's no question he's in trouble.
Yeah.
He's going to have to really scramble, even by his own terms. All kinds of polls show that Pat Quinn is in difficulty. Now, if they were to solve this pension thing, which is really dragging him down right now, because he looks like the captain of the Titanic that can't avoid the iceberg that's coming.
The guy who was put on Earth to solve the pension plan, after all, right?
That might turn things around, but at the moment, particularly if Lisa Madigan gets in the race, he could have a real problem.
And is she?
That's.
I mean, that's what I'm wondering now. Everybody else is in.
If you know the answer to that, go back to the Sun-Times and put that on page 1. Jim Crick will let you do it. I guarantee you. We don't know. It has appeared for a very long time that she is going to get in. She's certainly raising money like she's going to get in. But you hear different things from different people as to what she's really saying and thinking.
All right, and finally, Greg, I know a story you've been covering very closely, the 44th Ward Alderman Tom Tunney and the Wrigley Field thing. They're kind of splitting it up now. As of today, he's okay with everything except the signage, as I understand it, right?
This fight started out and ended up and always has been about one thing only: the rooftops and whether they're going to keep their views or not. Despite all the stuff about security and drinking,
hotels,
and
bridges,
and everything else, all that really counts is the rooftops. And the latest move the alderman made is clearly designed to protect the rooftops by reducing the size of the big signs that the Cubs say they need to generate the revenue to pay for everything else.
Okay, well, there you go. I think that's a very good analysis. Of course, I've always thought, Ricketts have a lot of money. They should just buy those rooftops and be done with it. Then it wouldn't be an issue.
I guarantee you, if they could take back 10 years, turn the clock back, they would.
And buy them. Yeah. Okay, well, I just can't thank you enough for being here today. A great conversation. Lauren Fitzpatrick from the Chicago Sun-Times. Hope you'll come back. Greg Hinz, always welcome here. Come back anytime. This may be my last show here on Chicago Newsroom, because I'm going to start negotiations with CAN TV to see if I can resign and they'll give me $400,000. That's my plan. That's how I'm planning on doing my retirement. I don't know how they're going to accept that or not, but it's a great way. It's a great way to retire. You have been watching Chicago. Okay. All right, 350. We'll negotiate right here on the air. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a service of CAN TV. And if you go to this very address right here on YouTube, you can watch us any old time you want. What a thrill that would be. Check us out there. Subscribe on iTunes as an audio or video podcast. And come back again next week for yet more of this, whether you like it or not. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching Chicago Newsroom. See you next week.